I think that being sustainable means inclusion and making it accessible to everybody, not just those who have the privilege to be able to pick up and move to an intentional community.
That's a pretty loaded question, I'm not going to lie. The American dream, to me,
I guess according to others, maybe the American dream is that you work hard, you make a good amount of money, you get a nice house, you raise a family, and you're successful.
And then you die.
And then you die. Which sounds miserable. Like, so boring.
Being like an American, having the American dream is just kind of like a life of being comfortable and just being able to do whatever you want, I guess, which is definitely not how it is.
Are you interested in sustainable living?
Yes, definitely. I mean, why wouldn't I be? Of course, you want to make sure that you're preserving energy, and if it's going to be cost efficient also, it just works for everyone.
That's a tough one. I mean, yeah, I like to recycle and do that, but I think that if it affected like the ease with which I lived, I probably wouldn't be as likely to do it.
Living a sustainable life, you gotta really work hard and make ends meet. Might not always be what you want, what you like, but sometimes you gotta swallow your pride and do it.
Sustainable living is a really complicated issue. I think sometimes sustainable living can be used as like a marketing tool to get people to like glob onto ideas when actually they're not sustainable, they're not beneficial for the environment. It's hard to like have this concept of sustainable living while that's happening concurrently. I'm all for sustainable living, I'm all for community. I just, hope that we can survive and allow for those things to happen.
So if we are to allow that to happen, what would you hope for future generations?
Learn how to properly dispose of trash. I see that a lot here, just people throwing their stuff whenever they're done.
With all this technology and all this social media, I wish to spend more time in our natural resources that we have, like going camping, hiking, going to the beaches.
There's hope in our generation because we have so many resources. I mean, it's access to so much information.
I think the biggest issue right now for future generations is the affordability of housing. People simply can't afford to live in the houses that we're building these days.
I live in like a 150 square foot box, and I pay way too much for that.
Co-housing is not a solution to that. Co-housing is expensive.
I'd be interested to know what other types of intentional communities there are, perhaps like communes, but a more updated version of that term.
My friends ask me how I'm doing on the commune. And it's so funny to me because I don't live on a commune. I live on a farm with people who also want to live and work on a farm.
A lot of people, when we tell them about the co-housing concept, they say, "Oh, you're bringing back the commune. We're going to live in the commune. We're going to share rooms and bedrooms and stuff." And I say, "Well, that's not exactly it. No." Roll 222, take 1, April 28th, Southeast 33rd and Belmont in Portland, Oregon. My name is Jim Swenson. I'm a retired filmmaker. I live in Portland, Oregon, and have lived in Oregon all my life. PDX Commons came about 2 years ago when several friends got together talking about looking at some alternative way of living out the last thirds of our life. We discovered that what we were talking about had a name, and it was called co-housing, and it appealed to all of us. Yeah, I think a lot of us are disillusioned by what we thought was the American dream. You get a house, you raise your kids, and stay in this big old house and stuff like that. And it really, the American dream that we saw really left out the last third of a person's life, which was what happens when you get older and you can't stay in that house, and what kind of adjustments do you have to make? I think a lot of us were drawn to this by what we saw happen to our own parents. Our own parents' generation generally didn't do a very good job of anticipating what it was going to be like as they got older. Now, let's think about what our needs are really going to be when we start aging. And it turned out medical, access to stores, access to restaurants, other services in the community. And it just made more sense to locate someplace that had great transit, great walking, great bicycle access. Because we all know that at some point we're not going to be driving anymore. We live in this 100-year-old house in a very nice neighborhood in Portland, but it's huge, and my kids are both gone now. Some people would want to stay in that home. I'm done with it. I mean, show me something smaller where I can have less of an impact on society and on the environment, and I'll go for it in an instant. You know, our view is that everybody has got to do everything they can to reduce their own footprint on the earth in order for a lot of these hopes and dreams to come true.
My hope is that this doesn't end when you leave or turn off the computer. I hope that it continues on and people can actually do something with the stuff that we talked about.
Currently, a lot of the solutions that these communities have come up with are in some way, shape, or form hindered by building codes or land use management codes, and if so facto, are illegal.
There are laws in place that don't allow a certain amount of people to live under one roof.
If there were a legal footing for a lot of these systems, we would see them pop up a lot more. Like, you would see apartment complexes with a wetlands or a large-scale composting toilet.
For these things to become more readily available, it's important to focus on starting locally by changing small policies that allow people to start doing these things like water catchment.
If we were able to subsidize eco-living, that would be one way to allow for a much wider range of people to have access to living like this.
Our only legal option is to poo in potable water. So we have examples of humanure systems in, urban tangible environments which are working. Instead of relying on porta-johns, you have the blue juice with all sorts of toxic who knows what.
Yeah.
And the next logical and, kind of only step as far as that goes is policy shift.
Once the infrastructure is in place, these are very low impact and low expense places to live.
Peacock Farm is a somewhat intentional but mostly unofficially non-intentional community of 12 people who live here and participate in some joint ventures. Try to have a good time living here on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon. My name is Greg Russell. I live here at Peacock Farm. I am contractually obligated as something of a groundskeeper, gardener, general do-gooder.
My name is Jake Olson from Winter Creek Drainage. I am an AmeriCorps volunteer.
I'm a new compost enthusiast. My first experiences with compost were more not really understanding why turning the compost pile made sense. And now I see it as one of the most joyful practices any gardener or plugged-in human can involve themselves with. Because it takes stuff that was cluttering your view and turns it into food for the most beautiful stuff around, the plant growth that you're cultivating. It's also a potential hot water source.
How does that work?
You run a coil of tubing. It could be plastic, could be copper, could be anything in between. And take it from an area of water storage to another area of water storage through that coil embedded in your thermophilic compost pile. And that acts as a heat exchanger, bringing the water temperature up to about 145 degrees. Basically, you want a 75%, 25% split between carbon-rich materials and nitrogen-rich materials. That's like a 3-to-1 ratio. So my favorite nitrogen-rich materials are my garden weeds. You could purchase nitrogen fertilizer at a store, or you could put a plant in the ground and it'll do it for you. Plant employees.
Least change for the greatest effect, right? We have this tremendous waste stream. We have things like we were talking about earlier with, compost thermal. How many chest freezers do you think get thrown in a landfill annually? And they're insulated to use minimal energy to keep things cold. Think about how many water heaters get thrown away annually, scrapped. But there's a copper coil inside that water heater. And you can take that copper coil right out of there and take that chest freezer. You can get it on Craigslist for free.
For free?
We have these things that are already produced, that have already been used. All of the energy that it takes to make that thing is being offset by you reaching into the trash man's trash truck and grabbing it and saying, hey, I want this. You don't have to use the fuel to take that to the landfill, and you don't have to use the fuel to process that in the landfill.
A lot of people don't understand, like, food costs a lot of money, transportation costs money, clothes cost money.
You know, a lot of people are living with children and not with a car, so it's a bus ride to get, you know, food that is good for your body.
People live in food deserts. What are you telling them? Don't eat?
I don't want to live in a camp where they're going to tell me what to do, what to eat, and where to be or where to sleep. I don't want to live in a world where stress, where you're going to hear the cops, like, they'll beat you if you don't do what they're supposed to.
Being able to carry these thoughts and conversations is a tremendous privilege.
At the moment, the intentional living community movement is more geared at upper middle class white people getting together to kind of like shed their stuff. I think that a lot of people would see that their cultures weren't represented in the communities that we visited, and that's a big critique of the intentional living community movement.
When I think of America, I just think of the different states and the different terrains and the diversity of people. But I feel like the American dream doesn't necessarily honor that diversity.
There's so much that's, you know, really systematic that doesn't make the American dream possible for most people, and yet that mythology remains.
I feel like there is a pretty strong norm around what you're supposed to want out of life, and I think it's almost entirely bullshit.
Now we have this chaos running everywhere, and we lost the American dream. Now we're in an American prison.
Maintaining a status quo that's keeping the rest of the world in slavery.
I don't think it's an accident that we have these norms. They're actually constructed because they are good for GDP. And I just don't care.
The traditional American dream, it doesn't exist anymore. Oh, I'm gonna work for a Ford Motor Company and have a lovely house in the suburbs and pay all these bills, and it's all gonna be hunky-dory. That's all just falling apart.
Instead of teaching people how to be human, we're teaching them how to be consumers.
Sadly, the American dream is dead.
To live in a place where I feel a strong community and that I'm a member of that strong community, bringing laughter and joy to people, having a garden and being able to eat from my garden is part of my American dream. I have a pretty loaded American dream. I didn't even know. Thanks for asking.